Welcome to PRI's Next Round Special Election Podcast. Our all-star panel is back. Lance Izumi, PRI Senior Fellow in Education, Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications, Kerry Jackson, William Clement Fellow in California Reform, and I'm Rowena Itchon, COO of PRI. So all the pundits were saying that Kamala Harris was closing strong and on the verge of winning the presidency, but not all of us. Lance thought that Donald Trump was going to win and going to win big, but Donald Trump won all the swing states as well as the popular vote. So in your view, what was the biggest factor in why the vice president lost the race? Was it policy, communications, strategy, or something else? Well, I'm going to go first because I feel very strongly about this. I put the blame squarely on Joe Biden and the senior leadership of the Democratic Party. We've all talked about in the podcast over the last couple of years, Joe Biden's slow and dramatic decline physically and mentally, but he didn't want to give up power. He wanted to run again, and the Democratic leadership went along with it, tried to gaslight the country, saying that he was just fine. The White House staff did what it could to cover up Biden's condition. And think about it, if he didn't run for a second term, the Dems would have fielded another candidate better than Kamala Harris, who we all know this campaign choked in 2020. She was one of the first major candidates to bail out of the campaign. So if the party had been given time in the regular campaign cycle to field a candidate, go through the primary, they would have been able to field a seasoned candidate. All they had was Kamala Harris, a lightweight San Francisco progressive elitist. So there it is. I believe it was all Biden's fault and the Democratic leadership. They only have themselves to blame. What do you think, Lance?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I did in our last All Stars podcast predict that Donald Trump would win all the swing states. And the reason why I predicted that was not just because I love Donald Trump, but it's because I thought that if you look at the demographics of, various groups, just prior to the election, they were all trending towards Trump. Latinos were trending towards Trump. African Americans, especially African American men. You had Arab Americans who were trending towards Trump. Trump ended up winning Dearborn in Michigan. And, working class people trending towards Trump, union households, all trending towards Trump. And so you can't have all those trends going in the same direction without it affecting the election, especially in these supposedly tight swing states. And I felt that was what was going to put Trump over the top, and it did in the end. And so, he'll probably end up, winning, north of 300 electoral votes and the popular vote. And I think that the reason why he did so well with those demographics is the reason why Harris was so weak, is that Harris didn't address the issues that were important to these various demographic groups. I mean, they were interested in how their prices were going to come down under a Harris administration. They were interested in how the southern border could be secured. They were worried about crime. They were worried about a lot of just meat and potato issues. And then Harris had really no plausible answer to give them. She should have had a terrific answer when it came to inflation. And yet, all she could do was kind of talk vaguely about price gouging by corporations. And people realize that that's not a solution, and that's not the real problem. If that were the problem, why didn't we have huge inflation under Trump's 4 years? And so, the fact that she couldn't address that, the fact that people were feeling it every time they went to the grocery store or the gas station, I think was a huge black mark against her. And, people remembered that. And, I think that especially these groups who, are living oftentimes paycheck to paycheck, that they were not going to give their vote to Kamala Harris because she didn't assure them that she was going to be able to make their lives any easier over the next 4 years.
I go back to what Roe was saying about they essentially chose the wrong candidate, waited too long, could have done something different. I think voters just, the more they saw of her, the more they said she's a phony, she is unserious, a lightweight, she's going to get rolled by world leaders if she gets in office. And she started out with how many questions, different questions, did she answer with it starting the same way? Well, I was brought up in a middle class neighborhood, and people are looking at it going, she can't even answer a question, a basic question, with any kind of coherence. She just goes to this scripted line that wore thin the first time she used it. And as far as a policy issue, I want to say that the price gouging, that she was going to crack down on corporations, and that's how she was going to get rid of inflation. I think people saw through that. I'm not going to say everybody remembers Nixon and price controls more than 50 years ago, probably not that many, but I think a lot of people, that struck them as that's not going to work. And she backed off of that, but I think by then it was just too late. So, the wrong candidate, a poor candidate, a weak candidate, and then again with some policies, which she did actually talk about policies, and there was a lot of flip flopping. I'm sure people saw that too and go, "How can we trust her?" She was hardline on this 4 years ago or even a year ago, but now she's gone the other way. Maybe not a hard line, but she just wants to be elected. She's saying whatever she thinks it'll take. So, that's what I'm looking at. That's what I suspect were the biggest problems for her campaign.
Well, I think, of course, everybody read Kerry and my book. That's really what turned the election. They learned how bad the California way really is. But I think that Kerry's right, and Lance too. It's policy matters, but it's more fundamental than just, well, does she have bad policies or not? I don't think voters knew where she stood really on any policy. We want to know where people stand on the issues, but deeper than that, we want to know what's in your heart. Why do you take the stands that you do? Why do you espouse and hold the values that you have? Our book covers this. Now, we know that here in California, her record, especially on crime, is mixed and complicated. Just like she ducked all the tough questions on the campaign trail, she ducked positions on the key public policy issues on criminal justice reform of the 2010s. She never took a public position on AB 109, Prop 47, and Prop 57. And this year, when she literally had just voted on Prop 36, she pointedly said, "I refuse to tell you one way or the other where I stand." So I think that, voters are okay if you have an unpopular position, but you're principled and you can explain where you're at and show them what your values are. Obviously, there was the issue with the flip-flopping. Well, I think voters are okay with politicians who make a principled evolution on an issue and walk people through their thinking, but they're not okay with someone who just gives a non-answer and who just thinks that they can, with the snap of a finger, disregard their entire platform overnight, not for any evolution in their thinking, but because it simply isn't politically convenient for this election. And you certainly can't have a spokesperson just say, on a Friday afternoon news dump, you're now not in favor of the Green New Deal anymore. So many people I heard, regular voters in interviews in the run-up to the election on TV or in newspapers, they said they don't know enough about her or where she stood or what was in her part. And I think this overly cautious strategy, which I think is really her comfort zone, I think that really did her in.
So Donald Trump is now on the way to the White House with a mandate to govern, and it looks like we will have a unified Republican rule in Washington with Republicans winning Congress. In your view, what are some of the policies that you expect a second Trump administration will have high on the agenda in the first few months and throughout the second term? Well, I hate to be a downer, but I'm weary of the executive branch and both the Senate and the House ruled by one party. When George W. Bush had the House and Senate, they went on a crazy spending binge, squandering all opportunity to reduce the size of government. It was very, very disappointing. So I hope Donald Trump keeps his first-term promise to finally drain the swamp that is all of Washington. What do you think, Lance?
Well, I think that he made it pretty clear on election night when he declared victory, when he said that the motto of the campaign and the administration to come is going to be promises made, promises kept. And I think that he is going to go to the mat on a lot of these key issues that he talked about during the campaign, because he has only 4 years now. And so he realizes that, it is now or never for him to get some of these things done. And he didn't go through all of the things that he's gone through over the last 4 years, in order to not do anything when you get to the White House. So I think he's going to be extremely energetic. The issues of immigration, for example, that's going to be in the forefront. I think that he's going to have to address the inflation issue, because that was obviously something that voters care deeply about. When he says that he's going to drill, baby, drill, I mean, the reason why he wants to do that is not just to increase oil production for its own sake, but to reduce energy costs in order to reduce inflation. So I think that there's going to be a real emphasis on that. I think that he's going to attack the administrative state, the deep state. And I think that, that's why he wants to have Elon Musk oversee that. I mean, I don't think that's just going to be window dressing. I think that he is going to move on that, because he realizes that was the big problem when he was in his first term as president. And finally, I think that he's going to address a lot of the woke issues, because that was a key motivator for a lot of voters who ended up voting for him. And I think things like having men in women's sports, that was a thing that really motivated a lot of parents who are upset about what is going on in their local schools. So, I think that there is going to be a very energetic second term agenda under Donald Trump.
Well, he's going to become a dictator right away, isn't he? That's what I heard. Well, maybe that won't happen. But the two things I think he's going to work on very quickly, Lance brought this up, energy, and I think he's going to go to work on the border, because that has been a big issue for 4 years, and I think that we can throw that in as also the reason of why Harris lost. And Roe talked about draining the swamp. Definitely needs to do that. I think he's got a lot of foreign policy problems to clear up too. There's a lot of work involved there, so he's got to do a lot of work before he even enters office and be ready to go after the inauguration.
Yeah, I agree with Kerry. I think foreign policy is going to be at the top of the list early on. I think the other two kind of key focuses, and these are easy things that you can do in a first term. There's a lot of regulations that the Biden administration is putting on the book, some of which will be fully past their implementation date before Donald Trump takes office. So I think Congress will be working together to quickly pass some resolutions rescinding some of these regulations. And I think those will be quick, easy, early wins for Congress and the new Trump administration. I think the other thing they're going to get to work on, and maybe pretty quickly, is the Trump tax cuts are expiring in 2025. There's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing over what should be in the renewed tax cuts, things like the state and local tax deduction, which is we've studied here at PRI, and which is complicated and politically challenging in states like California and New York, but it's the right thing to do. They're going to have some kind of resolution of that to not lose every Republican in California or New York. So I think taxes and getting rid of regulations, electric vehicle subsidies, clawing back money, COVID money, and inappropriate spending, taxes, regulations, and budget reconciliation, those are going to be the top things in the first few months. We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates, so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
So let's turn to California now. Now that Kamala Harris has been defeated, Governor Newsom is already trying to become the nation's biggest liberal thorn on the side of President-elect Trump. So he just announced that he was calling a special session of the legislature to fight Trump. So what do you think of Newsom's strategy here? And how should someone like Newsom be positioning himself given the national election results that seemingly are a rejection of his policies? Well, I'll take this on. I think he gets the award for the most out-of-touch politician. The American people just handed Kamala Harris and the Democrats a resounding defeat. And as we talked about earlier, it was just not about her. If that were the case, it might have been a closer race. It's a resounding no to what the left has been all about. Identity politics, out of control spending that's led to the inflation, soft on crime positions, this crazy emphasis on renewable energy that's straining people's pocketbooks at the pump, and the deterioration, I think, of, and Lance would agree, the academic performance of America's kids. If I were him, I would run to the center so fast. The country doesn't want to go, as Tim says, the way of California, and he just doesn't get it. And if he doesn't, he'll never be president.
Well, I think you're right, Ro. He should, if he were smart, run to the center, but I don't think he will. I mean, if he had that type of outlook, he would have embraced Prop 36, right? Because it was winning, it was predicted to win by a landslide, for months before the election actually occurred. And yet, he did everything in his power to undercut it. And so, I continue to see him as, the question says, a liberal thorn in President Trump's side. But I will tell you this, is that Donald Trump couldn't pick a better foil for him during his, this next term in office than Gavin Newsom. What better to always run against or continually, criticize than a California ultra-leftist like Gavin Newsom? And so, I think that Gavin Newsom may think that he'll be this thorn, but, actually, I think that Donald Trump will be smiling if he tries it.
When I first saw that he had called this session to essentially fight Trump, what we've known for a long time, he's running for president. But if so, he sure is taking the wrong first step. This may continue to play well in California, although I think maybe not as well as it did even a year ago. And it's certainly not going to play well in the swing states that Trump won. So, yeah, he's starting out. He's not moving the center. He's being hard-headed. I guess this is just what he has been trained for, to be this hardline progressive that never gives in, and he's not going to go anywhere with it.
Yeah, I think Gavin Newsom was actually the biggest winner and the biggest loser of election night. He was the biggest winner in the sense of, he was effectively had his political career sidelined by Kamala Harris. Well, now he has a path, and he's certainly not wasting any time in marching down that path and, becoming the nation's leading Democratic foe of Trump. But at the same time, as Lance and Kerry mentioned, he was the night's biggest loser, right? The big thumb down on Prop 36 over his objections. And during the campaign, when he talked about it, he seemed personally offended that voters would dare approve this over his objections because, he knows better than them, of course. He was the reverse Midas touch on the campaign trail. The candidates he endorsed, like Evan Lowe, went down in flames. But the biggest thing, and what Gavin is not realizing, is that his agenda, which he calls the California way, I think that was soundly rejected by the American people because obviously Kamala Harris espoused many of the California way ideas. And so if you're looking at, the task of you've got to win back Latino voters, you've got to win back disaffected Black males and Latino males, disaffected union households, Latino males and working class voters, they want to be able to start their own business and get a better paying job to make more money for their families and climb the economic ladder. They can't afford rising gas prices and expensive prices at the grocery store. And a guy like Gavin and his agenda says, well, just buy a Tesla. That's how you can afford gas prices. You won't have to pay them. Well, that's not what people want to hear. They want to be able to be their own boss, and he's pushing AB5 full steam ahead, which takes away their ability to work as they wish. And they push green mandates that drive up the costs of running a business, putting some, especially like land, yard maintenance businesses. Many Latino entrepreneurs start landscaping businesses, puts them out of work. They can't afford that, and in many cases, the electric-powered lawn equipment doesn't exist in the commercial space. People, and especially the voters the key voters that Dems need to win back, they want lower costs. They want less government. They want to be able to flourish on their own, and that's anathema to what Gavin is certainly offering them. So I think he's going to be in for a rude awakening. He's going to get a lot of noise on television and in liberal groups, but I don't think it's going to get him anywhere nationwide.
So if Governor Newsom and state lawmakers are positioning California as being an anti-Trump outlier in the country, what types of policies should Californians expect will be coming down from D.C. in the next few months in response to Newsom's efforts? Well, personally, I don't think Trump is going to care about California as a high-tax state or care about whatever Newsom and the legislature decides to do. In his last term, you might remember he capped the deduction on mortgages, which was hard on Californians who have these inflated house prices. So if Trump does lower taxes, if he reduces regulations, I would think that Californians would flee the state, and it would make California even less attractive as a place to work and do business. Lance, what do you think?
No, I agree with you, Ro. I mean, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to care one whit about, what Newsom and the special session does. I will say, though, that if you think about policies from the incoming Trump administration that would affect California, there are things that, for example, in my area of education, President Trump has been very clear that he'd like to see greater school choice. During his first term in office, he had an education savings account idea or proposal, based upon changes in tax laws. And so I expect that would also be something that would be coming down the pike again. And he said that he wants greater school choice in this second term, and that would affect California parents and their children. And I think that's going to be a very positive thing. And school choice has not had a greater enemy than Gavin Newsom in California, and so I think that it'll be one of those things that areas of combat really over what do parents want? Do they want greater choices that the Trump administration is giving them, or do they want to have somebody who is just going to be a continued pawn of the California Teachers Association?
I sort of have more questions than this is what I think is going to happen, but the questions I have are energy and emissions related. I do wonder if Trump's going to reject the California EV mandate, 2035 EV mandate, and what is he going to do? Again, there's also the diesel bans with trucks, locomotives. So he's the LA Times had a story, on this about how worried they are that, California's great environmental and energy, solutions are going to be threatened by Trump. I have to also wonder about the waiver that the state always has to get for its vehicle emission standards. What's Trump going to do about that? He talked about that in his first term. I don't remember the specifics offhand, but he talked about that. Well, maybe we won't renew that waiver. It's always been pretty automatic. Well, not pretty automatic. It's been entirely automatic now. So, I do wonder about what's going to happen along the lines of energy and emissions from the White House.
Yeah, I think Kerry's right. I think all the environmental regulations and these laws that California are pushing that are kind of de facto laws being imposed on the rest of the country, they're going to go after those. I would also look to clawing back unspent money that has been given to California, maybe high-speed rail money, things like that. I think they're going to go after some of that Sacramento big spending that, certainly lines Newsom's pockets, but doesn't really serve the taxpayers well. We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
So it looks like the polls were correct, and Prop 36 was passed by voters, about 70% of the vote in the latest returns. So what's your takeaway from the massive vote on Prop 36? What message do you think voters were sending, and how do you think Governor Newsom and lawmakers in Sacramento will respond to this? Well, if they were smart, as I said earlier, they need to respond to Californians and move to the center. Trump took an ever larger portion of the Black and Hispanic vote, as we all mentioned, urban residents who suffer terribly from crime. So the passage of Prop 36, which made penalties tougher for certain crimes, by a huge margin when it won, sends a loud and clear message to the Democrats in Sacramento. Unfortunately, it wouldn't surprise me if they're not listening.
Well, I think that's right, Ro. As I discussed in our previous podcast when I talked about the history of crime here in California over the last half century or so, you saw that the pendulum really swung in California when crime got out of control, and Californians had a sense that crime had gotten out of control back in the 70s and early 80s, which is why you saw George Duke Majan elected as governor, and then the left-wing Supreme Court justices thrown out during his tenure as governor, and a whole slew of anti-crime measures implemented. And I think that same thing has happened here, where crime has just gotten out of control because of these progressive policies, and people were voting based upon their own sense of their own safety. And it's a total repudiation of Newsom, who failed to recognize that and understand that people were really suffering and really afraid. And crime victimhood is bipartisan. I mean, this huge landslide victory for Prop 36 underscores the fact that it's Democrats, Republicans, independents, all of these people here in California are afraid for their safety, the safety of their families. And I think that this has changed the landscape of California. And you look at the recall of the election down in LA County for district attorney, where George Gascon was thrown out. I think it's really changed the political landscape, and I really think that it's going to be impactful in future elections.
This had to happen. I mean, the 70% doesn't surprise me at all. I think it just this kept getting worse and worse, and it probably just came to a point where people said, we're going to have to do something different, and here's an opportunity we have to go out and vote to do something different. Unlike Roe and Lance, I think they're going to do some listening. They're going to absorb some of this lesson in Sacramento. I think. I don't see how they couldn't, even though they had their own agenda to try to keep this from ever getting to the ballot. I think they're going to finally wake up and say, we have to do something about this. Now, what they do, that's the big question. How effective will it be? Will they just talk about it? But I think this lesson is so obvious, even they could learn it. At least look around and say, yeah, maybe we should try something different.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I think when you look at Prop 36 winning in every county, including over 65% of the vote in Alameda and San Francisco, you see the Alameda County DA being soundly recalled and the defeat of George Gascon. I think there's a thread that runs through all of these results, and that's quality of life trumps partisanship and ideology. Democrats and Republicans alike, they don't want homeless living in their doorways. They don't want to walk out to their car in the morning to see piles of glass because someone smashed the window. They don't want to have to, go behind lock and key in a store if a store is open to buy a bottle of aspirin. And I think that when politicians, who mainly are Democrats in California, are pursuing these kind of policies without regard to what people are experiencing in their daily lives, or maybe they're even pursuing things that are making the problems worse, I think they're not going to hesitate to take action at the polls. And I think this vote on 36 and the defeat of these high-profile politicians is proof of that.
From rent control to minimum wage, there were some very interesting outcomes on Tuesday night in the various state and local ballot measures. So of all the ballot measures that you were following, which results do you think will have the biggest impact on state or local policy in the coming months, and why? I picked Prop 36, so I think we talked about that enough. So why don't you go ahead, Lance?
Well, I agree. I mean, the Prop 36 dominates everything. As I said in my answer to the previous question, so I think it really is going to change the landscape of politics here in California. And I think issues like defund the police, it's dead. Right? I mean, no one, I think, in the wake of Prop 36 is going to be talking about defunding the police. And so I think that you're going to see, people now trying to catch up. The politicians are going to try to catch up with the voters and to show that they are, concerned about, their public safety, about people's individual safety. And the question then is, how authentic are those changes in their positions, especially amongst Democrats?
This is not a statewide ballot initiative. I'm looking at one, though, in Berkeley, that it was Measure GG, as in gas, an ordinance to adopt a special tax on natural gas consumption in buildings 15,000 square feet or larger. And this got beaten up pretty bad, almost a 2-to-1 saying, no, we don't want this. And, okay, so it's a local measure, but we saw this before, that this is where the natural gas ban campaign started, was in Berkeley. So maybe this will stop that, or at least move it back in the other direction. So I think that's going to have an effect statewide, even though it happened only in little Berkeley.
Yeah, I also have a local ballot measure that was very interesting to me in our work at PRI, and that is Measure J in Sonoma County. And for those who weren't following it, it would effectively ban animal agriculture in the county. And Sonoma County is a huge dairy community. Clover dairies are based in Sonoma County. And it was one of these measures in the wake of Prop 12, which, as you may remember, set restrictions on pork and veal and egg production that have also significantly increased the prices of pork and eggs since their enactment. But it's one of those issues, and PRI filed an amicus brief in the case that where California law is de facto setting law for the rest of the country, and because we have so much imports and exports of our product. And there was a case before the Supreme Court challenging the enforcement effectively of Prop 12 across the country, and they lost. So now Prop 12 is effectively the law of the land. So this measure in Sonoma County was kind of the next test case. And if it had been approved, of course it would go statewide. But a surprising thing happened on the way to the next global mandate here. 85% of voters in Sonoma County said no. And I think that's a very stunning statement by the voters that, yeah, we care about animal safety, of course, but we are not going to impose these crazy mandates that will have hugely negative impacts on jobs and the local economy.
There were, of course, hundreds of interesting races up and down the ballot in California on Tuesday night. So share with our listeners one or two races that you are following and talk about why you think the outcome in these races are compelling.
Well, Ro, I think that I was following a couple races, one in particular. Uh, in our previous podcast, I mentioned that I was looking at the race for one of the suburban Sacramento congressional districts where Kevin Kiley, a first-term Republican congressman, was running for re-election against one of Newsom's top aides. And a lot of money was being poured in by the Democrats into that race. And Kiley ended up winning by a very substantial margin. And I think that it's also significant given the fact that he was also one of the key and one of the most effective proponents of Prop 36. And so, therefore, he comes out of that election, I think, extremely strong. Not only did he dispatch this minion of Newsom, but also too by being a backer of something as popular in a bipartisan way as Prop 36. I don't know what Congressman Kiley is thinking of in the future, but I think he is one of the rising stars in the Republican Party in here in California. I think the other races that I think is very, very significant is that down in the Southern California area of Chino Valley, the school board races there, were pitting pro-parent candidates against establishment, union-supported candidates, and the pro-parent candidates who were supporting parental rights and greater transparency, and they had the pro-parent side had been actually targeted by state officials. I think that those pro-parent candidates won a clear majority. In fact, they swept. And so it's a 5-0 pro-parent majority on that Chino Valley School Board. And a number of other key school board races went in that direction as well. So I think that that shows that, when I talked about the Great Parent Revolt in one of my books a couple years ago, that Great Parent Revolt is still going on. And, you have not heard the last of the parent empowerment movement, certainly here in California.
Well, Lance chewed up all the scenery there on Kevin Kiley for me, so I'm going to try to see if I can add a little bit to this. It's somewhere I saw, and I just couldn't. I looked at it and go, that can't be right. It can't be right. That he might be struggling to keep that seat. And as Lance said, they targeted the Democrats targeted that district, but he wins with, what was it, about 57.5% right now of the vote. So it was a big win. It was a wipeout for his opponent. And he's a good friend of Pacific Research Institute, and like Lance, I think he's young. He's good on positions. He's good at explaining himself, explaining why he believes something. I think he's got a really bright future, and I'm glad he's representing California in Washington, D.C.
Of course, it's important to note that, as we're taping this on Thursday afternoon, there's about 40 to 50% in some cases of the vote that remains to be counted. So, the final margins in these races, I think we have the outcomes in those races, but the final margins, we don't know that they're going to be that robust. I would say quickly two things that I was watching that I found interesting were, again, though we're early in the counting, it appears that Republicans are on course to gain seats in both the Assembly and the Senate, which I think was really shocking. When you see in these races, Democrats were outspending Republicans in some cases 10-1. And you see in Orange County, you see former Senator Stephen Choi, who no one gave a shot to be going back to the legislature and the Senate, especially after he lost his seat a few years ago. His margin looks like it's pretty significant, that it would be hard for the Democrat to come back and take the seat. So I think that was very interesting to me. The other thing, kind of more generally on these congressional races, we said earlier, the road to the majority in Congress really flowed through California this year with 9 or 10 key races. And it looks like Republicans are on track to, again, we have a lot of late vote to come in, but it looks like they are on track to win enough seats in California to hold the majority. And I think, again, they were outspent in similar dramatic fashion in a lot of these races. But, I think that is very telling that it was California ultimately that could put Republicans over the top in the race for control in Washington. We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Weingarten tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness with founder and CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Stephen Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted.
So looking ahead, the end of the election in 2024 signals the start of election 2026. So we're going to have a very competitive race for governor here in California. Which candidates, Democrat or Republican, do you think were most helped by or hurt by the 2024 election results? And might we see a Kamala Harris for governor in the 2026 campaign? Well, I could be wrong, but I think Kamala Harris is finished. I would think the California Democratic leadership will want a fresh face, not one tainted by such a big loss. There's a buzz in terms of the Republicans. There's a buzz out there that Steve Hilton, commentator at Fox News, is considering making a run. He's got a populist message, which is where the GOP these days that's where they're trending. And he's also a libertarian, which I think suits Californians. So I'm watching him closely in the next year or so.
Yeah, Ro, I think that there is an opening for Republicans. You look at the fact that, Donald Trump received, I had predicted, that he would receive more than 40% of the vote here in California. And indeed, it looks like that's what he is going to get. And so I think that does create an opening for Republicans with the right message. Somebody like Steve Hilton or somebody else, I think, it would certainly be more favorable, a more favorable climate for them to run in than in years past. I think on the Democratic side, I think this, the more centrist a Democrat is, I think is going to be more helpful. I mean, you look at these Democrats who have, most of them who have declared or said that they're interested, from the Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis to Tony Thurmond, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Atkins and Yee, these different lawmakers and officials, they were all on the wrong side, basically, of Prop 36. I mean, I think a more moderate person, like, let's say, Antonio Villaraigosa, I mean, maybe being a centrist back in 2018 when he ran didn't work, but maybe being a centrist in 2026 may be a lot better place to be. So, I think that it's going to be a really interesting situation and not one where it's just going to be your usual, progressive, the most progressive person gets the nomination and then becomes the governor.
I think Harris is going to give it a look, the governor's race. I say this not because well, put it this way. She's one of these public servants, and I think public servants should be in quotation marks or italic, however you want to put it in this case, who really has nothing else to do. What is she going to do with herself? She's only 60. Or has she turned 60? Maybe she's still 59. I can't remember. But what is she going to do with herself? What skills does she have? What experience does she have outside of public service? Again, put that in quotation marks or in italics. That she can do. I guess she could just retire. There must be enough money there in the family to be able to do something like that. But I think she'll at least give it a sniff. I mean, she did take 57% of the California vote in the presidential election. So even though she was resoundingly beaten everywhere else, most everywhere else, that may be enough to give her some momentum here. And I like Roe. I'm looking at Steve Hilton. He's upbeat, optimistic. He strikes me as very dedicated to his new country and his new state of California. He's a little bit of a Renaissance man as far as, from my looking at him. So I think his infectious attitude is going to play very well as a candidate.
Well, I don't think Kamala is going to be enticed to run for governor because I think she's going to view it as kind of slumming it. Somebody made the point she doesn't want to exchange Air Force Two for a sea boarding group on Southwest Airlines as governor. So I don't see her doing that. She'll be in the public eye, but I think she'd rather make $200,000 a pop giving speeches or going on a book tour. I think I agree with Lance. I think those who were hurt the most were those who were on the wrong side of the crime issue. Antonio Villaraigosa really hit a home run because he was the star of the Prop 36 television commercials. And I think also another candidate who he didn't mention, who's a likely candidate, is our former Attorney General, Javier Becerra. So those who have had, a kind of bad record on these sorts of quality of life issues, I don't think they were well served by the election results. And I think they're in a tough spot as they spread out their campaigns.
So let's wrap it up by going out on a limb and make some long-term predictions. So who will be the Republican presidential candidate in 2028 and why? I'm going to go with a couple of people. I'm going to go with potentially DeSantis. I think he's learned a lot from this campaign, and he could be the next standard bearer for the GOP. What do you think, Lance?
Well, I really think that, as I said again in our previous podcast, I thought that one of the, best things that Donald Trump did was to pick J.D. Vance as his vice presidential running mate. And I think that it turned out to be the best and most consequential vice presidential pick in modern history. J.D. Vance added to that ticket. He was incredible. He was like a great compliment to Donald Trump, and yet stayed on message. He was the polar opposite of, just the strangeness that was Tim Walz. And, he's an extremely smart fellow. And he is, I think he really proved himself, because in all the media appearances that he did, from being on network TV to, again, like Trump, doing 3 hours of the Joe Rogan show. So I really think that, assuming that Trump has a successful presidency, I really think that J.D. Vance has the inside track.
I'm going to go with Vance. I think the more the public sees of him, the voters see of him, the more they're going to like him. He can be quite brilliant and sharp. At the same time, I think people are going to identify with him. So I'm going to say, I also think Trump's going to put him out there a lot more than the Biden administration put Harris out there. They kind of, hid her for obvious reasons, but I don't think that's going to happen with the Trump administration. So I think he's going to get a lot of exposure, and people are going to find out what he's about, and they're going to like him.
I totally disagree on Vance. I think his act is going to wear thin with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is if you study him, Donald Trump is responsible for anything good. Anyone else who starts to get some credit and get some limelight, it's only a matter of time before they're sidelined. So I think before too long, he's going to get the shiv from his boss. And my prediction, because at the end of the day, if you're Donald Trump, as we know, it's all about keeping it in the family. And so I predict Don Jr. will be the Republican presidential candidate in 2028.
Okay. So who will be the Democratic presidential candidate and why? I think it's going to come from one of the moderate governors, not Newsom, of course. I think perhaps Shapiro of Pennsylvania. He would have I think he's going to be the guy to watch. It's clear he should have been Kamala Harris's VP pick, but she lacked the humility to pick someone who would actually help her win, but also potentially outshine her. What do you think, Lance?
I agree with you, Ro. I think it's going to be Josh Shapiro. I mean, Newsom, is going to try for it, but I think that the Democrats, the thing that they're going to want badly in 2028 is they want to win, and they're going to see that they made a huge mistake in 2024 by having Waltz on the ticket and having incompetent like Harris at the top of the ticket, and they're going to want somebody who, like Josh Shapiro, who is a moderate and can appeal to all those groups that Donald Trump co-opted from them and have left the party.
It's obvious. It's going to be Tim Walz, right? It's got to be. No? Okay. Well, I'm going to go out and say, I'm going to pick a wild card that nobody has thought about, that I haven't even thought about. I think it's going to be somebody. There's going to be some changes. Now, if I had to pick one, yeah, I would go with Josh Shapiro. But I think there are going to be some changes in the party, and we're going to have somebody just we've never thought about, maybe not even heard of, that might come out and be the Democrats' 2028 candidate.
I think it's going to be Mayor Pete. I think he has the potential to appeal to a broad contingency of the party. He'll raise a lot of money. He's a very effective communicator, even on Fox News. So I predict Mayor Pete.
Wow, there we are. So thanks, Lance. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Tim. And thanks, everyone, for listening. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.